Hey, folks, guess what? New show coming out on Lighthead. That's right. It's kind of spun out of our show. It's called the Get a Grip on Rebates podcast on Lighthead. Wow. New show, Greggy.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. Should be great.
Talking all about different rebates, the ins and outs of rebates, the jargon, the types of rebates, how you can get rebates. There's so much call for that in this industry right now. And so they just decided to start their own podcast. That's right. And they named it after ours, Sons of Guns. But this show is sponsored by our friends at Light Efficient Design. Go to led-llc.com, Greggy. That's led-llc.com for Light Efficient Design.
And check out their new product, the LBI, otherwise known as a linear transformer. It's very flexible and versatile, which I'll tell you about. It's ETL and DLC listed as both a retrofit kit and a fixture. And that can matter in rebate situations when you're talking rebate show here, that you have that capability to do both. Sometimes you get a better rebate on a kit. Sometimes you get it on a fixture. You can do both with this. And each of these LBIs can be field adjusted between 3 color temps and 3 wattages, making up 9 SKUs in one light bar. That's what I love about what Light Efficient Design does is they have the flex cut watt and flex color technology. So you can have all these different kelvins and different wattages and lumens out of the one product. Eliminate your inventory, keep the one. And you can connect up to 40 of these together on a single power feed, seamless connectors or linking cables, and a 100,000 hour life 10-year warranty. Go get them.
Gotta love those guys. Go to led-llc.com. That's led-llc.com for Light Efficient Design. Enjoy Joe and Juan Carlos coming out hot.
So, Joe, I think we should start off today with sort of why utilities are even doing these rebates and the terms they're using there. And I'm thinking especially of energy efficiency and kilowatt hour savings. You want to talk a little bit about those two terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So energy efficiency is very much considered a resource from the utility planning side. When a utility looks at how they're going to meet the load growth of their market and meet the needs of customers, energy efficiency is actually up there, right alongside generation. Not nearly as big as generation, of course, but energy efficiency is actually a lot more cost effective to invest in than new generation. So therefore, a lot of attention has been paid to it the last couple of years. And we're really kind of seeing that take off in a bigger way across markets in the future too. You can kind of think of efficiency as a resource, and that's really the way that you should think about your job if you're out selling efficiency. What you're really doing is selling a resource to your end customers. And the reason that the utility wants to incentivize you to sell efficiency is because they see value in that resource.
Right.
It's as simple
Joe,
as that.
Joe, to interrupt you for a second, they measure that in kilowatt hour savings, right? Because that is how they measure pretty much all things is in kilowatt hours, right? If they're either using or saving kilowatt hours, and so their cost effectiveness, as you mentioned a little earlier, is based on what a product will save them in kilowatt hours, right? And the energy used there. Right. Yeah. I was going to say that also ties into demand response. Do you want to talk a little bit about what demand response is? Because that's also rationale for the utilities.
Sure. Yeah. So to be clear, projects have to be installed and operable before efficiency really takes place in the market. That's kind of obvious, but it's not just a matter of buying the product. You also have to install it and have it in an operating function. And that, is a big part of what, efficiency programs are attempting to push. The measurement by which that those savings are calculated is, as you mentioned, kWh, which is really just a mathematical equation of the use of energy over time. And the electric bills we all pay and that our businesses pay, that's how we are charged for use of energy. So, you don't need to know the mathematics behind kWh, but just simply you're trying to save kWh. So therefore, the utility doesn't have to serve you, and you're not, actually consuming more energy. And demand response comes in because in demand response, the way that this is played out in the market is because technology is now connected to the internet, it's now connected to the broader ecosystem. the utility can actually send you a signal. And that signal can say, look, the cost of energy is really high right now. We're going to incentivize you to reduce your usage at this time. Now, in a consumer application, it's something like a smart thermostat that changes your AC. Your AC changes on a hot day because, you've signed up for a program and the utility has told you, hey, we're going to turn up or down your temperature.
Right.
And that
And the
plays out in
utilities are
commercial in
really
the same way.
and the utilities are really incentivizing the ability to manage those loads through demand response programs. Great. And I appreciate kind of the definition of kilowatt hour and kWh and how that is used by the utility to really charge their customers. And the products themselves, whether they be light bulbs or smart thermostats or appliances, are actually measured in those kWh savings that they provide to the grid. So yeah. Now, that being said, the utility is also pools their funds and pools their programs into 3 different sectors. Actually, a variety of different sectors. 3 of them being the focus, and the ones that we focus on, particularly in lighting, but also in other products.
Yes, residential, commercial, industrial. Those are really the 3 split, and there are some programs that also split out things like small business and multifamily, and there's other splits as well.
Agriculture's in there as well. Sometimes rural, right?
Retail
I think the important
can
thing
have its own offering.
Absolutely, and I think the important thing for you guys out there to understand is that the utilities are going to have certain pools of money for each sector. So and programs are going to be designed for each sector. Sometimes that makes sense that you focus programs just on residential, like if you're talking about maybe smart thermostats or light bulbs. But in some cases they may overlap sectors, and that becomes a little bit complicated for the utilities to manage, to have programs that overlap sectors. So when you're going into a talk to utility, you really got to understand that they are going to be interested in either residential or commercial or industrial or something more specific like a small business or an agriculture, something like that. Yeah. We deal with that quite a bit, right, Joe?
Yeah, and what you got to remember is that the money that supports each of these program types, that money is coming from each of those customer segments. So, the residential funds that are driving res programs, those are coming from homeowners. The commercial funds that drive those programs are literally coming from those businesses in the marketplace. And that's why they're cut up. The one thing I'll say is that a lot of people get frustrated by the different ways of going after the program money, and processes are always, unique across all these segments. That is just kind of the way of the world. And if you want to be successful in this space, you just simply have to accept that and be able to talk the talk inside of each of those segments, and understand that you're going to have different conversations with different people across the chain.
Right. Absolutely. And you bring up money, Joe, and that's important because the money itself, the way it gets funneled into programs, might be in a variety of different ways. And utilities love to use the idea of I guess it's a river. And they call these programs, usually the money is either what they like to call upstream, midstream, or downstream programs. Joe, I want you to expand on that a little bit for our listeners.
Yeah, this is really an industry way of looking at the business. It's not a really good way to explain something to an end customer, but for listeners of this podcast, I think it's important to kind of get this difference. Let's start with downstream. Downstream is kind of where everything started. And the idea of downstream is that you're incentivizing the customer post-purchase and you're paying them later.
Right. And that's the end-use customer we're talking about, right?
Correct. Yes. The end-use customer is getting paid after the purchase is already done, after the install is already in place. Downstream, the money's flowing later. And then, midstream is kind of the connection of the selling entity, which in most commercial industrial programs, it's a distributor, an electrical distributor. They're the ones selling to the end customer. But instead of making the customer wait 6 weeks for a check, they're going to give them the incentive at the point of sale or at the transaction. And that usually requires some validation that the customer is eligible. And that's midstream. And the listeners in this segment are going to really have opportunities in midstream in the future. In a lot of ways, it bridges the gap and makes things easier than the downstream method. And the final...
Well, just to be clear on those midstream programs, the utility has made agreements with those electric distributors or with other entities to provide that instant rebate. Right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. And there's
go ahead.
I think you got it. I was just going to say there's a lot of front end work that goes in for a distributor to get set up for one of those. But once you're set up, you're kind of set up. Like there's no real ongoing setup issues, just maintenance.
Right. And we know this well, Joe, because you and I are working on a midstream program together right now. So, and then there's upstream, right?
Yeah. And upstream represents a deep connection between the selling entity and the manufacturer. And the big difference here is that there is no customer validation. The incentive is almost automated. It's available on the shelf, or it's automatically built into the price. I like to call this automated incentives because, in reality, the customer kind of doesn't even know that it exists in the background. They just know that the efficient product they're buying has a discount associated with it.
Right.
And this is really done by backend.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen these types of programs at your Home Depots or your grocery stores or your big warehouse stores, where you see the instant rebate taken off the money taken off the price of the product. They've been pretty popular in the retail space, run through residential programs. Again, now we're using those terms we've been talking about, and those again are agreements that have been made between the utility and the manufacturer and their retail or distributor partner to provide those instant rebates. So, anything more you want to talk about? The sort of go ahead.
I would say here's how I'll kind of best explain it. In the downstream to upstream transition, in downstream, a lot of the work is put on the end customer or the end contractor who's involved in the sale. And then in midstream, it's kind of, instead of it being on them, it's really on the distributor to handle the validation and to handle the transaction. And in upstream, the final kind of like most efficient leg of the stool, the manufacturer takes a lot of responsibility. They take the risk in a lot of cases. Some of the manufacturers offer the credits to the retailer immediately and then deal with the sales back to the utility and taking the money back later. So it kind of just changes who is responsible. But ultimately, if we think about it, the customer is the one who we're trying to serve in all these situations. And the less we can put on them, the better. And that's why the future is really defined, in a lot of ways, going to be defined by midstream and upstream programs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great point putting that out there, Joe. I think it really, for these programs to be cost effective and to be successful, utilities, they really need to be focusing on that midstream and upstream channels. The downstream are really cost intensive for utilities and require a lot of work, both from the end user, but also from their contractors. So if you are a contractor, you're probably going to be dealing a lot with downstream programs, but you'll be seeing a lot more availability of midstream programs through your local distributors or your local retailers of these products. So,
and I don't think one thing I want to just leave on with this topic, Juan Carlos, is we should not knock the downstream programs at all, because if we're thinking about it from a sales perspective, there's a lot of money available in those programs if you take the time to figure out the paperwork and the process. So I would encourage
absolutely
the listeners to still.
I hope you
focus
didn't
on
feel
that
like
too.
we were knocking those. Yeah, we definitely weren't knocking them. They're just not, I guess, as cost effective. That being said,
Yeah.
they are going to the downstream programs are the ones that are going to make room for things like full building control systems or whole home control
Yeah.
systems, because those are much more complicated type programs. And we're not going to get into those now, but we are still going to see the existence of downstream for a while. But in terms of energy efficient products piecemeal, they're going to be more in the upstream and midstream. This sort of ties quickly to the sort of the incentive type. We talked about instant rebates through midstream and upstream, and I think that makes a lot of sense with an instant rebate. But there's also what utilities like to call prescriptive and custom rebates. And let's talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit and where those fall into.
Sure. Again, these are utility related terms, but prescriptive simply means a 1-for-1. So you take out this metal halide wall pack, you put in this LED wall pack, there's a prescribed incentive. That's where prescriptive kind of comes in. It's $100 off, $100 for
And
this
usually
to that.
And usually the utility has a whole schedule of that on their website. You can see what those numbers are. If you're a contractor, or you can see what it is that you'd be available to get, or an end user from a prescriptive program. Right.
It's
Those
relatively
programs
clear,
are
I'd say.
right. And those programs, prescriptive programs, are mainly downstream, right?
Well, the term prescriptive is used kind of across all three ways of going to market. In the midstream instant, those are technically prescriptive incentives. They've prescribed a dollar amount for a certain purchase. That's kind of what prescriptive refers to, is that there's just simply a prescribed value.
Thanks for clarifying that for me. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Versus custom, which, to go back to our energy calculation, thing we were talking about earlier with KWH, custom is a calculated incentive, and that's really what it is, just calculating what you're currently using versus what you're going to be using, and then coming up with a value for that energy savings. And that's what custom is really, meant to do, is just calculating actual savings.
And the utilities are using the term custom because usually the savings that they're going to offer and the money that they're going to offer is custom designed for each project or customer based on what the energy efficiency change is, whether they're changing all the lights in their warehouse or they're changing all the building a spec home, that sort of thing. Those are all custom designed for the customer.
That's correct. Yes, it's per project, really, is what it comes down to.
Right. So those are the terms when you talk to utilities and you're talking about the program types. You're going to have, again, that instant rebate, a prescriptive rebate, or a custom design program.
Yes.
Those are generally the terms. There are a couple more things we talk about in the utility space in terms of program type. Again, the term instant is used when you have an instant rebate program. But there's a couple terms I think I want to get across there. There's the term pre and post inspection, right?
Yeah.
Often used for custom programs.
Yes.
I think, Joe, and tell me if I'm wrong here, that makes a lot of sense. It's intuitive what pre and post inspection is. But you want to talk about what's required there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's as simple as thinking about, before you can start a project, if there's a pre-approval requirement, you have to make sure you go through that and deal with it before you execute on a transaction. We've seen many times where, either a customer comes to us after kind of being burned by a process that they didn't fully understand, that it really needs to be understood. And also, pre-approval requirements are not just in the custom programs. They also do extend over to prescriptive in a lot of ways. Like, a lot of times utilities will say, if this incentive is going to total more than $10,000, it needs to be pre-approved. And that's just a way for them to protect themselves. And then post inspection is just simply, hey, did you do what you said you're going to do? And if you did, we'll pay you. That's kind of what it comes down to.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for programs that have the pre and post inspection, often you're going to be working with an energy specialist at the utility or an energy services team at the utility to set that up and to get those set up. We'll go into more details on that in future podcasts, but right now we just wanted to get those terms out to you. I think for me, the last term I really want to talk about. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Well, one thing I wanted to just say on the inspections can sometimes make contractors and distributors anxious. But you have to keep in mind the utility wants to see you succeed, and they want to see you actually perform the work and get it done so they can pay you. They're not there to like audit you in a way that they're going to tear you apart. So it's important if you are subject to an audit, whether it's a pre or a post, just simply be present for that utility inspector. They're there to help you. They're not there to tear you down. They're there to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember that you want the utility wants their kilowatt hour savings as much as you want the incentive money. So it is a win-win for everybody if things are done right. Want to end it up with one last term that we hear in these programs, and that's direct install. Let's talk about that briefly and yeah.
Yeah, so direct install is kind of exactly what it sounds like. The utility has contracted with somebody, and usually, what we call an implementation contractor, or it doesn't have to be an implementation contractor. It could simply be a contractor in a certain market that has agreed to do a certain level of projects and simply go into customers' businesses to perform those installations. A lot of times the customers are offered deals that seem too good to be true. And, many of the listeners have probably encountered opportunities like this where it sounds like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go into a small business, install LED tubes, and the customer is going to pay me, very little to do this work. Well, it's because the utility's taking the risk. They're the ones putting it out there. They're the ones hiring that contractor to do the work. And that's direct install in a nutshell. And in order to find those opportunities, you've got to have good connections with the utility. You got to kind of work in your relationships to figure out. And you can ask this very clearly. Say, hey, do you have any direct install programs coming in the future that I can participate in? And getting involved in those can be a very good chunk of business. It can be very lucrative, especially if you're efficient.
Absolutely. So, and we've seen the direct install in the past quite a bit in insulation projects, and now they're growing with smart thermostats and that sort of thing. So, anyway, so thank you, Joe, for helping define all those terms. Quite a few terms there. I know this was quick and there was a lot there, but hopefully this was helpful to you guys, our listeners, and Joe, always a font of knowledge, and I appreciate you sharing what you know about those. And we'll talk again soon on the Get a Grip on Rebates podcast. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Juan Carlos. Looking forward to the next one. Light efficient design, transforming light. You can visit led-llc.com to learn more.